Good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this evening's CF Live event. My name's Jacqueline. I work in the Information and Support team at the Cystic Fibrosis Trust, and I'm really pleased to be here this evening with our panel to discuss the topic of eating well on a budget with cystic fibrosis. So for anyone who doesn't know, this is the third event in our series of nutrition events that we've been running. We had a launch event back in August last year, which was kind of a general look at how nutrition is evolving in CF. And then we had a really well-attended session on nutrition and modulators in October. And if you've missed either of those and you'd like to catch up, they can both be viewed on the Trust YouTube channel. And we'll have a few more events coming up as well in our nutrition series, which I'll tell you about towards the end of this session. But this event is all about eating well on a budget, and we wanted to run this event, obviously given the impact that the rising cost of living is having on many people who are living with cystic fibrosis, and which is obviously already a very expensive condition to live with. And of course, two of the main areas we're seeing costs increasing are to do with food costs and also energy costs, and two areas which obviously have particular implications in CF. So we're hoping that this evening will be an opportunity to talk about challenges that people face to eating well when household finances may be stretched, but also to look at some practical steps that we can take to help finances go further when it comes to food and ensure that people with cystic fibrosis and parents and carers of children with cystic fibrosis can still maintain a healthy diet, but also recognising that diet and nutrition in CF, particularly with the advent of modulators, is becoming increasingly individualised, and so a healthy diet for one person with CF isn't necessarily the same for the next person. So we hope you'll find this next hour useful, and hopefully you'll get some practical ideas on eating well. We will be sharing details of our support services as well at the end of the session for anyone who feels like they could do with some further advice or support. And as always, we encourage you to seek personalised advice from your specialist CF teams. So as you may have seen, the session is being recorded and it will be shared on our YouTube channel afterwards. So if you don't want to feature on camera, please obviously turn your cameras off. But just to let you know that the chat history won't be shared publicly after the event. So please do feel free to post any comments that you have, share your own experiences and tips if you're comfortable doing so. And please do also put any questions that you may have for the panel in the chat as we go along, and we'll try and get to those if we can. And my colleagues from the Trust will be on hand in the chat and sharing links as we go along as well. So we have a really great panel this evening who are going to be sharing their lived experiences of CF, but also their professional expertise. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, and I'm going to come first to Holly, who has very kindly agreed to act as my co-chair this evening, and she's going to be leading our panel discussion. So Holly, can I ask you to introduce yourself first of all?
Yes, so I am Holly and I'm 29 from Nottinghamshire. I have two children, one who is 5 and one who is 2 years old, and the youngest is the one with cystic fibrosis. So I hope that you find this event relatable and helpful tonight.
Thank you very much. And I can't see if we've got Luke on the call yet, because one of my colleagues just let me know.
No, he's not, Jacqueline.
Okay, so we were expecting Luke, but he's been having a few technical issues. So I'll move on and ask our specialist dietitians to introduce themselves as well. So can I start with you, Claire, please?
Hi, so my name's Claire Woodland. I work at Alder Hey Children's Hospital in Liverpool in the Northwest. I've worked there for about 7 years. I work with all of the respiratory team, and about 60% of my work is related to cystic fibrosis. And I've worked in various other places for several years prior to that as well. So lots of experience from lots of different areas and places.
Thanks very much, Claire. And Katie, can we come to you?
Yeah, hi, I'm Katie. I am a CF dietitian in Birmingham at the West Midlands Adult CF Centre. I've worked there for about 3 years now, but I have previous experience as well. And I also work one day in the general medical surgical team, so I have a range of experience with different patients as well.
Thanks very much, Katie, and thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. If Luke's able to join us, hopefully he might be able to join the discussion partway through, so we'll keep an eye out. But meanwhile, I'm going to hand over to you, Holly, if that's okay, to get our discussion started.
Thank you, Jacqueline. If you see me looking down, I do have a few notes, so do excuse me. But this event is obviously about eating on a budget, but we thought it would be useful to start looking at CF diet and how it's evolving. So CF is a very individual condition, as we're all well aware of the modulators that are becoming available for people now. So Claire and Katie, could you tell us from your perspectives as a specialist CF dietitians, how CF nutritional advice and eating habits are changing, and what does that mean for people affected by CF?
Do you want me to start with the little ones? So obviously from our point of view, it is massively changing. We've obviously got a history of a high calorie diet being kind of pretty typical, and in the paediatric centre, pretty required, really, generally speaking. At some point in most children's lives, they would have needed high calorie advice at some point or other, if not consistently, prior to modulators. I think more recently we have had children that are more well, just generally, you know, in the little ones that are maybe still pre-modulated, so the sort of 2 and 3 year olds. So we do have to think a little bit differently, but then there are still some that need that high calorie advice. So we definitely have to be much more careful about making sure that families aren't maybe following generic CF advice, and making sure it's very specific to them. And then obviously being aware of the ones that will get modulators, and how we need to make sure that their diet is going to be appropriate pre and post modulators. So if you get children into sort of habits of eating certain things, you know, and then we want to change that, then that's very difficult to do. Obviously, currently that is for the vast majority at 6 that they get a modulator. So a 6-year-old that's been trained to eat a certain diet isn't going to be very happy with us if we change that. So we're having to be much more conscious of that, you know, in these little ones, and not, even though they might need high calorie advice because they're pre-modulator, we need to be much more careful that the advice that we're giving will be appropriate in their post-modulator situation. So that's different. Also in relation to salt, that's much more different as well. The advice about salt was always fairly sort of liberal, and we didn't need to worry about that. But again, if we have patients on modulators, we then have to think about what that's doing. So we can't have children having high salt diets, because we will want to change that. And again, these are things that are difficult to change. So we definitely have to think much more about that in little ones, you know, which we didn't before. At weaning age, maybe, you know, we're really having to kind of be really careful that we're weaning them onto what will be appropriate, and actually asking people maybe not to follow what is like on the online advice, because that's almost now wrong, because the online advice isn't as up to date maybe as we are with the modulators and things moving forward. And then obviously our teenagers, we're having to then maybe get them eating healthier, and really having to give them completely different advice, which I'm sure is similar for Katie, so she can sort of pick up on that. But, you know, we're having to think differently about pulling back on their calories and more healthy eating, which again, I'm sure is the same in adults.
Yes, as following on from that, yeah, we're definitely moving more towards healthy eating advice. We're looking at long-term health, because modulators have increased the life expectancy. So we're looking more at increasing fruit and vegetables, reduction in the high energy options, reducing that fat intake, looking to maintain weight if people have got good weights, and we're even doing some weight reduction with our patients. There's a lot more focus around sort of managing the diabetes, blood glucose levels, and looking at that overall health that we would in the general population. Heart health as well has been something we've been focusing on. We have had a lot of people move back to the workplace, feeling better, they're busier, they have less time to prepare and cook food than maybe some of our adult patients that were more poorly, so stayed at home. So they had more time to do the food and the prep, but now they're out and at work. So it's almost relearning sort of habits and fitting into new routines as well. We have got the patients that aren't able to access the new treatments that they're not appropriate for, and also post-transplant patients that again don't take the modulators. So there are patients out there that we're still doing the high calorie advice for, and we're looking at still lots of snacks and food fortification. So when we look at moving towards talking about budgeting and things, we actually got a whole range of patients now where we need to look at what advice we're giving, especially when we're looking at people that might be struggling to meet their needs on a tight budget, So yeah, because people say healthy eating is expensive, but also high energy diets are expensive. So there's a lot of areas of advice where this hopeful session will be useful across the board.
Yeah, that's even I'm learning, like, you know, even I am learning. But just to sort of pick up on a few things, Amelia from the get-go, we was always told healthy, balanced diet, you know, not to up the salt, as you said, Claire, with Googling things. But I also have a background in family members having CF, so I've seen the change in the diet and things like that. They're like, oh, is she having, you know, full fat Coke or, you know, energy drinks and things like that? I'm like, no, it's all like healthy stuff now. So it's definitely a change. This next question was meant for Luke, but I'm going to try and answer it as best as possible, to tell you what healthy eating means to us. I mean, pretty much covered it with Claire and Katie, a healthy, balanced diet, but also is something we find a little bit challenging because time management and things like that, and, you know, routines and fitting everything in, and snacks and, you know, finances, all of that jazz. So yeah, so I hope as we move on we'll cover some more bits about that. Oh, this is actually the next question about challenges in eating well, from a financial perspective, because it's not only buying the food, it's then cooking the food. And not only when we go shopping now as a family, we're having to think about how we're going to cook it, because, you know, what takes less time, you know, what appliances have we got, you know, we use the slow cooker quite a lot for, you know, those hearty meals, but they're also a great way of shoving it in, turning it on, and, you know, letting it do its thing all day. But yeah, we have had to cut down on a few things because of the cost of living crisis, and we can literally stand in the kitchen watching the money just going down as we're cooking the food, you know, quicker than before. So yeah, we definitely have to be more mindful in what we're cooking and how. So Katie, as an adult dietitian, like are people saying the same as what I've said, or what are their concerns?
Yeah, I think you've sort of covered it. The cost of food, the cooking of food, a lot of the people I work with tended to rely on eating out and trying to enjoy food as well, because obviously it is part of treatment. They like to go out, takeaways and things like that, and the cost has crept up. Other concerns, I think it's always, when you Google it, it's going to be cheaper to cook from scratch. But not everybody has the abilities for that. Not everybody has the time if you've got to do lots of physio sessions and you're also working. And a lot of our CF patients also are now having their own children, which we're seeing more and more, which is a great thing. But also, again, children, they take away your time, don't they? And you put all their effort into them. So some of the adult population are trying to balance a lot more now, as well as the concern with the cost of living. There's a lot of other changes that they've gone through in this time. If you add it all up, it's a big change actually in the last few years for our people living with CF.
Yeah, thank you. And Claire, what about you and your family? Some families have more than one child, like myself, but also have more than one child with CF as well.
Yeah, we have several families with more than one child with CF in our clinic. So, you know, that obviously in itself adds more challenges, because those two children might not actually need the same dietary advice anyway, let alone, you know, if there's another sibling without CF as well, which, you know, so you could have, you know, we've got some families with two children with CF and then another child without. So it's, you know, it can be really challenging anyway, like outside of the cost of that. But also with all children, as they get certain ages, they get a little bit more challenging in relation to what they will eat. They only want certain yogurts or certain this or certain that, so that they all, invariably they want branded things with, like nice pretty pictures on, and that type of thing. So that makes things challenging for lots of families, so it's just trying to, avoid getting into some of those things if you can, just making sure that it's not that you can never have those, but that we're always changing things and mixing things so that we don't get stuck in only expensive brands or specific brands that children might prefer to have. The other thing that's really difficult is getting children to eat. When you're struggling from a budget point of view and then children won't eat, it's even more frustrating if you're then, what we would say is, well, if they don't eat the food, that's it, that's that meal, and we just move on to the next day. But that's not so easy when you're struggling to buy that, so that advice can be really tricky, and that what can lead is to then children just always being given the foods that they prefer, that the parents know they're going to eat, because then there's obviously no waste from that, which when there is significant cost implications, that becomes more challenging as well. So it's like trying to find a balance of that, making sure that we're not creating poor eating behaviours long term and keeping good range in their diet, while making sure that we're not having lots of waste for families and costing them with, and their children not actually managing to really eat anything. So, we look at that lots of different ways, again, trying to sort of preempt some of that, rather than wait till we've got problems when they're maybe 2 or 3. We're kind of talking about things like that when they're maybe only 1, and they, that 1-year-olds, as we know, do most things that we like them to do, but by the time they're 18 months old too, they're maybe not so reasonable. But if we can get families thinking about it earlier, then sometimes we can preempt and not create some of those problems that are then more challenging to get out of. So we definitely do lots of counselling and that sort of work in advance, rather than waiting for these things to happen. And then with our older children, we just, again, we're kind of having to think a little bit differently and really kind of working with them about options and choosing one thing differently and things that they will eat. And we spend more time doing that kind of discussion with children and kind of making plans and kind of goals and things that they will try this or they'll try something different, so that we can get them to move forward. But from a family point of view, on a budget, we often try and always give them kind of the lower calorie, the lower cost options anyway, so that we're, that would be our kind of go-to for the vast majority of situations, really. So, we try and steer them in that and give them ways to make things go a little bit further, or share between the 2 or 3 children, so that they may be all having a little bit of an expensive thing and a half of that, and then half of something that's not as much, if it's sort of snacks and things like that, so we can make things go a little bit further and not cost as much.
Katie, have you got anything to add to that at all?
No, I think yeah, they are all of the sort of problems that we're facing across the board. And yeah, it doesn't matter that our patients are adults. I think they still have the same problem as potentially Claire just explained, that people have eaten one way for a long time, and we're asking them to change that. And it is a difficult situation to be in, because you get your likes and dislikes, and asking to change that is difficult. And I think they have the same view. I don't want to spend a lot of money on something that isn't necessarily healthy if I'm not going to enjoy it, because I don't have that spare money to spend, which is understandable, but it is a challenge for them.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. So the next sort of section is going to be about how to eat well on a budget. And so we've discussed some challenges that CF people are finding about eating well. So we now wanted to look at some practical ways that we can manage a healthy diet in CF when finances are stretched. We'll start with food shopping. So we've obviously seen an increase in the cost of certain foods in the supermarket that can feel very expensive. So when shopping for ourselves, this question was for Luke, so I'm just going to read ahead. So how we've adapted our shopping, basically. So before all of the cost of living things and obviously having a child with CF, we would shop in one supermarket, where now I am finding myself having to split the shops, find the cheapest bits in each shop. I probably go to 3 different shops, including like the pound shop, Aldi and Asda. They're all kind of local to me anyway, especially for like snacks and things like that. I always find this, for example, Amelia absolutely loves yogurt coated strawberries. So, I mean, like I said before, I'm not very savvy in the kitchen. So, you know, things that I can kind of grab, I can take to clinic, I can take out with me is really handy. Getting them from Asda was £1.50 more expensive than going to the pound shop, where I actually got more for £1. So I have to literally shop around. Same for fruit and veg. I have to go to Aldi, Asda, all that kind of thing, and split it to find the cheapest option. And same for freezer foods as well. Sometimes farm foods, sometimes not farm foods, maybe Aldi again. But also I do struggle with like stock issues of certain foods as well. If one place hasn't got it, I'm like, oh, I've got to go and find it. So that can be quite tricky as well. So to Claire and Katie again. So we've had a couple of questions on ways to get enough calories and also foodstuffs to keep blood sugars stable without breaking the bank. Are there any foodstuffs people with CF should prioritise when shopping that aren't too expensive? That could help in these areas.
So, and looking at this from like a healthy eating perspective as well, like I'm sure dietitians have said, basing meals on starchy carbohydrates, that is going to be the best way to sort of keep you going, keep your energy level stable, but also keep your blood glucose levels stable. And they can be more of the cheaper options. It doesn't have to be that you go for branded options. You can go to the value options and get bags of pasta, potatoes. They do tend to be sort of the cheaper foods that you can base your meals off. If you are thinking about your blood glucose levels, brown options are better, but not always cheaper. So it is weighing that up, or whether you could do half and half. And then protein options, again, I'm sure we'll mention this throughout, that protein is probably one of the most expensive things to get hold of if you like to get your protein from meat. Meat is a really expensive option at the minute, with prices going up all the time. So it's looking at whether you can use vegetable options for protein, whether that be lentils, beans, even some dairy options are a little bit cheaper. Mixing those in with the meat, especially if you like, say, for example, a spag bowl. You like a spag bowl that's got beef in it, and changing all the way over to, say, a tin of lentils is very different. Mixing that tin of lentils in with a smaller portion of beef will be much cheaper, but will also add in extra vegetables to your diet. So you're sort of meeting two there. Fruit and vegetables, again, sort of they're the sort of 3 major parts of the diet that I'll speak about. Looking at what options have you got. So you've always got frozen options, they're cheaper. They are just as nutritious. And then there are canned options. But when you're looking at fruits, it's making sure you're getting the ones that aren't, you know, in syrup if you are struggling with your blood sugars, around that. Again, you mentioned shopping around for different vegetables, always going in and looking at what the whatever, depending on what supermarket you're in, there's always vegetables for, say, very low prices and certain ones. Now, if you are not a picky eater, or you're not the parent of a picky eater and you're quite flexible, then that's a really good way of, number one, getting different vegetables, and number two, getting them cheap. But that only works if you're willing to have anything and know what to do with it. But yeah, going for frozen, going for things that aren't pre-prepared, because a bag of carrot batons, for example, you're barely getting any carrots and you're paying over the odds because someone's already cut them for you. Whereas if you've got the time and the ability to chop them yourself, that is better. But everything's a weighing up situation, isn't it? Carrot batons, I can buy them and take them straight away. but you've got to do some prep otherwise. So it is a balance.
Definitely. Claire, do you want to add anything?
I mean, there's a few little things that, you could say, I think Katie sort of covers it, like you say, the things that patients can have. It's a little bit different when you're looking at younger children. The whole grain foods are still appropriate for some, but it isn't always for everybody. So you do have to sometimes not always get the whole grain, but the adding in the proteins, with the lentils and the beans, that's really great advice. Like you say, manage that. And again, it means that children are getting used to eating them. And then you've got them as an option as well later down the line. The other thing from a shopping point of view is just trying to get things that are in season, because they obviously cost less in season. So that's just another good tip. Don't get things, try and buy your strawberries in the summer and accept that you're only having them in the summer, or maybe buy the frozen vegetables, like the fruits like that, in the winter, so that you're not paying so much for them. So it's just being a little bit more conscious of that type of thing from a cost point of view, that what is in season, what can we get fresh now and what can we get frozen now, and switching them around at the different points of the year. And yeah, if you can get sort of markets with fruits and veg, that's often a little bit cheaper, those sorts of things. But again, it is a bit tricky. If you can't always, it's if you've got the time to go to 3 or 4 places, like you said, that's brilliant, because that's always going to be the best way. But for some people, that's not so practical. And then, as Katie said, then going for the cheap ones on that day in that supermarket when you go. So it's just little things like that, got to just keep making the difference, and being conscious of what is expensive at that time, and maybe avoiding it. And it doesn't mean you're avoiding it forever, but you're just avoiding it that week, because it felt like it was particularly, because that's how food is. Some things are particularly expensive at certain points.
Yeah, definitely. That's really good. So people with food allergies, intolerances, such as dairy and gluten, can obviously find food shopping really expensive. Are there any ways around it?
I can take the gluten bit. I actually live in a house that doesn't eat gluten, so it is very expensive if you're going to go and buy the things that have gluten-free written all over them, probably similar to dairy-free as well. So it is thinking, what are the options that are more naturally gluten-free, and using them as a base. So for example, bread is probably one of the most expensive options, closely followed by like cereal bars, cereal and pasta. I'd say pasta is probably the cheaper option if you go into gluten-free. But looking for things like rice, naturally gluten-free and very cheap for the store cupboard. Similarly, rice noodles, potatoes, trying to base your meals off them, and then looking at snacks that would be more naturally gluten-free, and reading packets. Often things can be gluten-free without them stating it on the front. It just happens that they've not got it in. So sausages is a good example of that. Crisps, for example, some branded crisps will always have something added that wouldn't be gluten-free, but actually some of the store-owned very similar versions are. So it's time, but it's taking time to research, look online, find what works and what is cheap for you at the time. And then always looking in the discount section. Sometimes you can find some really good free from stuff in the discount section, because less people buy it, which means you can get some really good deals. I'll let Claire speak about dairy, because I think she probably deals with more dairy allergies than I do.
We don't have many actually, but yeah, I mean, the thing with dairy, it is more tricky, and obviously there's buying alternatives, but if you get used to doing things from scratch as well, that really helps, because then you're not having to sort of buy, like if you're looking for things and looking for it in it, you're often then having to buy a more expensive version, because that's the version that is dairy free sort of thing, rather than if you're cooking things from scratch, you can kind of just replace the element with a dairy-free alternative. Lots of that's a little bit more tricky to keep, because a lot of the branded ones are the ones that just from a nutritional point of view are better, particularly for children. I think in adults, the supermarket kind of alternative milks are always fine. Unfortunately, in children, that's not quite so appropriate. So in that situation, you'd probably have to very specifically be, speaking to the dietitian what was relevant for that child, because for some they will need, the protein and the high calorie in more of the branded options of alternative milks is a little bit more difficult. But trying to not always need to get things that are an alternative, but actually just going for things that are dairy free in the first place, and not having to buy something that's special, just that lots of things are dairy free and they don't need to be marketed as dairy free to be okay. So that's the way you need to kind of try and do that if you can. But I'd be really clear that we need to be dairy free. We don't always need to be. So just making sure that what you're doing is appropriate for the child that you've got, or adult. I suppose adults are making their own decisions, but for children, that making sure that is the right thing for that child, and that because it is much more difficult, one, to get everything you need on a CF diet, and to do it cheaply if you're having to follow a dairy-free diet.
Yeah, thank you for that. So we've had a question about proteins as well. I know we spoke earlier and you mentioned about beef and bulking it up with vegetables, but this one's in particular about alternatives to fish, which has also become very expensive. I am a fish lover and I've had to, tuna is about my limit now. And even that's quite expensive, but I'm very rational. Is it rational? Yeah, rational with it. But yes, are there any food stuffs that you can provide that offer a cheap, healthy source of protein?
Yeah, so the protein sources, sort of the lentils, the beans, whether they're dried or tinned, and eggs, depending on the day, how cheap eggs are, they really fluctuate at the minute, can be cheaper. Looking at those vegetable sources are probably the best. I did do a little bit of research into some fish. Frozen fish are not the main types of frozen fish. So if you're looking for frozen cod, they're going to be more expensive. But if you like white fish, something like a baza fillet or a less well-known fish, I can't think of them off the top of my head, would be better. I always get the baza fillets. They're cheaper because they're frozen and you can cook them from frozen, which means no defrosting fuss, which is quite good. Also then tinned fish. So you mentioned tuna, which you ration in your house. Also things depending on where you are in terms of whether you love fish or whether you're just introducing a little one to fish. Pilchard sardines, mackerel, for the big fish lovers out there, would provide some fish and some protein, and they are cheaper, and they can come in a range of sources, apparently, I've looked at. But I'd say they are more strong fish. So if you are a white fish lover, the frozen versions are probably better for you.
Thank you. Claire, do you want to say anything about protein?
Yeah, a coley is another white fish, just to if we're yeah. So a lot of those frozen things is what I would do with fish. Like you say, fresh fish is very expensive and very difficult. All small children, if you give them it young enough, will eat pilchard sardines, mackerel in a tin. So it's, again, for the younger children, get them eating it younger, and it doesn't matter if they're not eating it all the time, but it's then at times where if your budget's a bit tighter, well, then you've got those options 5 years from now. If you've got young children, it doesn't need to be right this minute, but if you get children eating a good range of those things very young, they'll keep eating it as they get older, and that just gives you options. And yeah, we can't sort of stress that lentils, beans, and again, for us, get children eating them younger, because you can get them in all sorts of things, in soups, in stews, anything, and it just means you need to put less of the meat or fish product in.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I am actually learning so much. I'm not even joking. Amelia loves tuna as well. We always share tin. So the next sort of topic that we're going to cover is budgeting and meal planning and reducing food waste. This is something I need to take notes in also. So one of the things that many people find useful, both when food shopping and also avoiding waste, is meal planning. I'm going to hold my hands up. I never ever meal planned, but when I was asked to do this, I thought I'm going to have to start I'm going to give it a go, you know, just as like research type thing. And it was actually so much easier to make a shopping list. I have recipe books that's been in my cupboard and I didn't even know existed until last week. Going through recipes and, you know, sitting down with my husband and just going through what we'd like to eat. And you know what, it was so nice to get another variety as well. And then we found making meals from scratch, as you've both said, was a lot cheaper to get ingredients and things like that. Again, it is about time as well to actually do it. I'm fortunate enough that I can be at home, and I am an amateur cook. I don't particularly like cooking, but I think once I get my head into it and start a little routine in meal planning and making time to, okay, so I've got clinic this week, or you know, she's got a sweat test, or you know, something like that, that's going to take a couple of hours to sort of plan around, and then school runs as well. Yeah, so I did find it really helpful to actually meal plan. And waste wise, there was less waste than normal. So yeah, I think there is a downloadable meal planner that's in the Cost of Living Hub on the website. Sorry, I'm just skipping through. So Claire and Katie, do you have any other suggestions about how meal planning effectively, and is there anything that we should be looking at meal planning to ensure that we get a balanced diet that we need?
Yeah, so I put together the meal planner on the CF Hub, which is actually, let you in a secret, is how I plan my meals. So if it's good enough for me, I'm sure it will help everyone else do a healthy, balanced diet. I hope as a dietitian, I do have a healthy, balanced diet mostly. So yeah, the way I did that was looking at how you can use ingredients throughout a week, so you don't have to buy. So one good protein source that we haven't mentioned, which can be cheaper depending where you get it from, is sort of a meat alternative. Again, looking into that of which ones, because some are quite, you know, high in fat if they're more like a sausagey type one, or ones that are more like chicken. It depends on what you're looking at. But say if you bought a bag of corn or soya mince, using that twice in a week is going to make your shopping cheaper, because you don't have to buy two separate options. You could put them in vastly different meals. So a bag of soya mince, you could make a spag bol and a cottage pie with that split, so you don't have to buy a separate protein. And the way that I like to write my shopping list to help me check that I'm having a healthy, balanced diet is writing it in the sections, say, of the Eat Well guide. So writing down all the carbs I need to buy, writing down all the proteins I need to buy, all the fruit and veg that I'm going to buy, and how I'm going to split that vegetable portion or protein portion across the week. So I am not buying, you know, a whole bag of carrots to cook 3. I'm using those carrots in a couple of meals, for example. It also helps you sort of flag up where you're buying extra snacks and how many extra snacks you're buying and how healthy they are, depending on what your goal is, whether it's to gain weight or lose weight. You sort of know whether you've got the food in the cupboard, or whether you may be buying more cakes and biscuits than you probably need, or where you can cut down on your shopping costs as well. So that's sort of how I do it. I look at the meals and make sure I'm spreading my ingredients over to reduce the waste, really.
Yeah, I mean, I could just add, for families, meal planning can be really great as well, because if you've got, you know, 2 or 3 children that are a little bit fussy, then, you know, if everybody gets an option of a day, you know, where they're getting something that they prefer as well, so that, you know, that just means that it can encourage children to accept that, well, we've got to have a, you know, our preferred thing, but we have to accept that everybody else gets theirs as well. So it does mean that they're often eating a little bit more, which is often very helpful, just from a general kind of, you know, be willingness to eat point of view. The other thing is, if you meal plan, you can then sort of bulk cook a little bit as well. So as you said, if you've got clinic tomorrow, you know, you're not going to have time or whatever it might be, that kind of little bit more planning gives you that option to think, because what we don't often do, you know, we think, oh yeah, that's a great idea, but if you don't think about it ahead of time, suddenly you think, oh, I should have done that, and it's kind of, you know, after the effect. So if you have planned, you can think, well, actually, if we have that on Tuesday, that's great, because on Wednesday we've got clinic, and then I can then have that meal on, you know, Wednesday as well, or Thursday, or whenever it is. Or if you've got after school activities with young children and they need an earlier tea because they may be off dancing or football or something, then you've got something ready prepared, which is still a good nutritious meal that hasn't maybe been expensive, rather than maybe that kind of thinking of, okay, we haven't really got time to cook, we haven't really got time to do anything, let's just nip to some form of, you know, fast food restaurant that you can drive through on the way to football or dancing, which clearly costs more and is not as nutritious. So that planning just prevents sometimes that, what everybody does, sort of deviating to the, you know, to that kind of quick easy food, which is often, you don't want to do it, but you kind of end up doing it because it's the only way to get through the day. And I was there once as well. So so that the meal planning does prevent that a little bit, because you know, you've kind of preempted that situation ahead of the game, and you've got something at home that, you know, you can run in and eat, you know, even if it's just microwaving yesterday's leftovers.
Yeah. I know, thank you for that. Sticking with you, Claire. We've had a question from a parent of a toddler with CF who likes food one week and dislikes it the next. Difficult question, perhaps, but how can parents plan and budget around a fussy eater? I know we've kind of covered it a little bit, but
yeah, I mean, you know, that is challenging, because you can't really, because the thing is with a fussy eater, that's by definition what they are. They're going to be a fussy eater, and the way forward from a point of view of a fussy eater is not to sort of feed into that behavior by kind of going back to what they want all the time. So, you know, if, you know, my advice is generally to people, you know, if you know that there are certain things that they will always eat, put them in 2 or 3 times through the week, so that you know that through the week they will have eaten some. And then, you know, the other meals, the other things, that kind of 1 week eating it, not the next, you know, you have to just accept that you're going to offer it to them. And if they don't eat it, they don't eat it, because otherwise you're going to create more fussiness down the line. And what you actually want to do is very quickly kind of nip it in the bud, really, because if they know that they can get something else or get what they want, you know, that fussy eating will continue. All children will at some points refuse to eat something that yesterday they were eating beautifully. That's completely normal. It's actually a developmental point that they are sort of exerting their own independence, and that they are realizing that they can make choices. So actually, if children weren't doing that in some way, you know, it's actually them missing out a developmental step, that they're trying to go, well, I'm going to do what I want to do, and you can't make me do it. And that's okay, but they need to realize that the consequence of that is that they don't get anything to eat, not, you know, I can kind of push the boundaries and I get option B, C, and D, you know, brought out to me. So, you know, it's not that we expect children not to do it. It's just about finding a way through it, and ideally as quickly as possible, because if you can nip it in the bud, you'll find that they're then just eating better for you again.
Oh, brilliant. I'm quite lucky because Amelia does kind of eat anything I can put in front of her. But Alfie, who doesn't have CF, he is such a fussy eater, always. But we will offer him the vegetables and things like that, but he just will not eat it. So
yeah. It's really hard for children when they won't eat, isn't it? And like you say, we can't make children eat things they don't want to eat, and that's okay. Like you say, it's okay that they don't, but if we can encourage them that it's not that they dislike it, they just didn't want to eat it that day. That, you know, it's just about kind of making sure we're not feeding into their dislike, because it's very easy for us to say, oh, well, you know, Alfie doesn't like those things, and then of course Alfie's like, oh, don't I? You know, and then suddenly he believes his, you know, and he's got a little bit more of an argument to sort of push back on that. So, you know, if we encourage children that they do like things, it's fine, you don't have to eat it, you know, it's just about keeping it relaxed and in not becoming stressed about that. Because the one thing that children will pick up on is if you become stressed about it and you try and push, they'll push back that little bit more. So the key thing is just ride it out, and, you know, over time, most adults, Katie might argue back, but most people are kind of eating a reasonably broad diet. You know, there are a few I'm gonna, you know, but generally speaking, that really fussy toddler behaviour that you get has gone away eventually, you know, so in the vast majority of cases.
Brilliant, thank you. So what kind of ingredients are useful to have to hand for a quick and easy meal prep? Are there any store cupboard essentials that can be used to make simple meals, or cheap ingredients that we can add to bulk out meals and make them more nutritious? I think that's to either one.
Go for it.
Do you want me to go? Sorry, Katie, I thought I was trying to take turns. Yeah, I mean, we have put a list together of that I think will be on the hub, which you can see, but you know, like just keeping some sort of basics, have some herbs, have some spices in your cupboard that, you know, you can, like, you know, if you're not the meal planner and you can just open the cupboard and think, these are the ingredients I have. You know, if you've got, you know, some basics, either pasta or rice, if you've got, you know, some form of tomato base, you know, you can chop some vegetables, you can put some lentils if you've got those in your cupboard, a few herbs and spices, tomato base, you know, you can rustle something up with that. So having a few of those, you know, kind of basic things is really useful, particularly if you're not the planner, because then, you know, you can just sort of think, what have I got in my cupboard and what am I going to do with it? And you can always make a meal out of it. So having some form of, you know, carbohydrate, the pastas, the rice, having the proteins, the lentils that we've talked about, whether they're dried or like the beans, you can get them either tinned or dried as well. Some fruits and you know, veg of some kind, whether that's tinned fruits, tinned vegetables, frozen vegetables, you know, whatever, you know, you can still have some of those again. So even if you've got no fresh veg, think, oh, I haven't got any fresh veg to go with this, you know, you can open the freezer and just add something in to whatever it is. So, you know, having a bit of a basis of everything. So I've covered the proteins, I've covered the carbohydrates there, I've covered the fruit and veg element of it, you know, gives you the ability to kind of put some form of meal together with whatever other ingredients you've got that you can add in. You know, so, you know, some basics like that, some form of tomato base is often really useful, you know, some, you know, if you keep some tinned fish in as well, like you said, there's a whole range of stuff that you can do to just make sure that you've got a little bit of, you know, of each food group, few herbs, spice, this and that. You can get something quite tasty from that as well.
Yeah, we've looking in the fridge and being like, right, what needs eating? What can we make out of this? Look in the cupboard, right, well, this needs, and it's usually a stir fry or some kind of wrap, or, you know, something with potato wedges. It's really quick, and then we think, why don't we cook this more often? It was so quick, it was really simple to do, even for my cooking skills. Why don't we do it more often? But it's really nice that we've been able to get a variety as well when I actually sat and planned out the meals and everything. So Katie, have you got anything?
Yeah, number one, I think that is a really good thing with meal planning. You get to eat a variety rather than get stuck in a loop of when you're in the supermarket, what meals do I like? And you get stuck doing the same ones. But if you're meal planning and putting time and thought, you get a variety. I would also say on the frozen veg thing, get yourself down the frozen veg aisle. I'm always surprised what you can get frozen and how much cheaper it is. So I'm a big lover of spinach, call me Popeye. And I buy it in the freezer section. You get the little cubes of it and you get so much for so little, whereas you pop to the salad section, the actual spinach when you cook it down is tiny and it costs double the cost of this big bag. So get yourself down there, especially if you like vegetables that tend to be more of the expensive ones, more of the exotic vegetables, if you're that kind of person, to see what's down there. I think also thinking about what's in the freezer, and looking at the next question that was for Luke, was on other ways to reduce food waste. Having a day in your food planning which is mop up all the vegetables and put it in something. I like to do that with the risotto. Other people like to just throw it in with, I like to do also like pasta, just with any vegetables that are left over. You could also use it to cook it into a soup, even if you're not going to eat it that day. If you've got freezer space or fridge space, you can then use that soup. So not letting anything go into the bin is sort of a really good way of doing it. So again, you could make it into a tomato-based sauce if you've always got a tin of tomatoes in. It doesn't matter what vegetables are in the fridge or even what meat's in the fridge that might be going off. All of that can be thrown in with a tin of tomatoes blended down into a soup, kept as a sauce, thrown on top of pasta, thrown on top of rice, adding different spices in on the day. Even if you're having the same tomato sauce with chicken in it, you throw in chili and cumin, you've got some sort of spicy. You throw in lots of herbs, you've got something Italian and some garlic. So you can do something different with that. So I'd always say, before you put something that looks like it's going off its best into that compost bin, into that normal bin, have a look, think, would I be able to make anything out of this that I can save for another day, even if I'm not going to eat it today? And making the most of all of the vegetables. Don't be throwing away, you know, if you've just done it and someone's only going to eat half a carrot, don't throw the rest of that carrot away. Or if a recipe calls for, I don't know why recipes do this, but sometimes they call for half an onion, and if you really want to follow that recipe, don't throw away that other half. Make sure that you've planned to use it in something else.
Yeah, no, that's really good.
Or buy frozen onions that are in the freezer, and you can just use them whenever you want. The spinach is a great one. I tell patients to do that all the time. One of those cubes of spinach into a bolognese, into a stir fry, you know, because it means that children eat it, whereas it's hard to keep it in the fridge and get them to eat it when it's that obvious green spinach, but stirred into something kind of disappears. Great.
That is a really good idea. I am going to go on the search for some frozen spinach.
Yeah.
Love spinach as well. I think what I found as well, some supermarkets have loose vegetables, so only getting what you actually need that week. Because we was buying like the big packet of mushrooms, they last a couple of days, you know, 4 days at the max, before they start going a bit funny. And then some supermarkets have the loose ones and potatoes, and just grabbing what we actually needed for that week was less wastage as well. I found. Sorry. Do you have any thoughts on how we can reduce costs associated with cooking the food we buy?
Yeah, so I think this is referring to, I've done something for the website on cost of cooking when we're looking at energy bills and things as well, rather than just the food. Let me refer back to it. So it's sort of talking around, for example, if you want to cook, say, 1 oven roasted chicken breast, you're going to heat a whole oven up and cook it, say 20 to 30 minutes, whatever you're doing, just for one tiny thing. So it's talking about thinking a little bit more around energy uses with cooking. I know you mentioned, you know, you can see in your kitchen your smart meters like telling you how much you're spending while you're cooking. So thinking about other appliances, I know Holly, you mentioned earlier, I don't know whether it was just to me on the call, around using your slow cooker. Great option. And I know people will have all sorts of different gadgets, whether that's a grill or something in their kitchen, and using smaller appliances can be quicker if you're only cooking a few things. Slow cookers, they use energy, but they're on sort of low all day. Also can be great if you are someone that does not have a lot of time. There's a lot of dump recipes out there into a slow cooker where you just sort of open tins, open frozen veg, throw it all in, and you come home and it's a cooked meal. So that is a really good option. Additionally, using your microwave, you might not think, but you can cook fish, eggs, even like a jacket potato in the microwave, and vegetables. You can do fresh vegetables or frozen vegetables in the microwave. Say if you've got a pan on and you need something else, rather than putting an extra oven on to say do a jacket potato, you could just throw that in the microwave your beans, and you've got a whole dinner without turning the oven on. Thinking about when you're cooking, so if you're going to have the oven on, which is great, cooking things at the same time. So for example, this is probably more if you use your oven a bit more, if you know that you want to say bake a cake and you're going to do a cottage pie for dinner, putting them in at the same time, yes, it might slow the cooking time of both of them down, but you don't have to cool the oven and then heat the oven. So thinking, when am I going to do that, can help as well. Putting the lids on your pans. So many people, pan on, cold water, waiting for it to boil. It just takes so long. Stick a pan on it, lid on it, or even use your kettle. Again, even when you've got something in the pan, it just helps with the cooking time. Defrosting, some people will use the microwave to defrost, say, a pack of frozen mints. That takes a very long time, and is using energy to do that. Popping that mint in the fridge, again, it's all prep. If you've meal planned, you know that you're going to use that. Popping that in the fridge costs you nothing to defrost because your fridge is already running. And then the last thing on that is talking about the kettle. I think this is discussed quite a bit. Boiling the kettle takes a lot of energy, so just boiling the water you need. Just a few things.
Yeah, thank you.
That's all right.
Claire, do you want to add anything?
No, I mean, I think Katie covered it there. The baker in me says you can't put your cottage pie and the cake in the oven at the same time, but you can put them in simultaneously, so you only have to heat your cooker once. And you know, you're not, you know, that's exactly the right thing to do. Think about that. If you've got to make bake sale cakes, you know, one day when you're meal planning, plan that in so that your oven is on once, you know, so that, because that is the thing, we're all you know, we're all guilty of doing that, putting our oven on for cooking something very small in it, and that does cost a lot of money. And also when you're meal planning, again, think the same. Can we just cook something? Can we have 3 items of the meal in the oven, or you know, one on the top and all on the top in one pan, rather than we've got one thing on the top, one thing in the microwave, one thing in the oven, you know, and then you've obviously had all 3 appliances on. So it's just being conscious of that, and how long, you know, you're having things on for. You don't need to have, you know, trying to make sure that you're at that point doing it at that time, not kind of prolonging the cooking and sort of doing things in stages, because then it just means that you often have your appliances on for longer. Somebody's actually asked a question about their son, if I'm okay to answer that, Holly, just about a 1-year-old and trying to sort of give some high calorie advice. It's quite tricky with the 1-year-old. It does depend on whether there's something else, there's another child in the family, which obviously I don't know the answer to, but ideally with the 1-year-old, you want them to be aiming to eat what you're eating. So if there's other people in the family that don't need the high fat, then we would suggest just adding high fat into that thing that you were doing. So if that is, you know, if you've got a cottage pie, make it for everybody as it stands, and then, you know, the 1-year-olds can maybe have extra butter put into the mash on the top and some cheese on that type of thing, because you wouldn't necessarily want that to be done for everybody. If you can afford for it to be for everybody, you know, not kind of following that normal healthy eating norms, you don't need to drain the fat off the mint so much. If it's okay for everybody, because that's obviously what I don't know, you know, you can just leave some of that in and not maybe be thinking, oh, that's really bad for us, we'll drain that off. But it, you know, probably it's not great for the adults in the family, even if there's no other children. So, you know, ideally adding in the fat afterwards when it's a 1-year-old. And the advantage to doing that is you can also take it out if they don't need it. So what I was saying earlier on at the beginning, we're having to think differently. What we don't want to do is train a child to only eat high fat foods, because we might need to change that. I don't know whether that child is eligible for modulators, but if they are, that's probably not, they're not going to probably be waiting till they're 6. They're potentially only waiting till they're 2 or 3. So actually in another 2 years, that child, you know, has the potential to be on a modulator, and all that high calorie advice might need to be removed. That's much easier to do if you're just adding stuff in, because you can just stop adding it in. Whereas if they're just eating high calorie foods, it's more difficult. So we would always be recommending what we call fortifying foods, adding the fat in, whether that's double cream, cheese, either soft cheese or hard cheese, using peanut butter in things, you know, butter and things, you know, using a little bit more fat in food as you're doing it, because you can just stop doing that if you need to. Whereas, you know, just eating high fat foods is something you're not going to be able to change, particularly a 1-year-old.
Oh, thank you. I hope that question and helped in some kind of way. The last topic that we want to look at before we take any questions from the chat is food on the go. particularly snacks for children and adults, which can be expensive to buy. Could the panel share any of their tips on nutritious snacks, packed lunches, etc., that doesn't cost too much? I mentioned earlier about the little yogurt snacks and things like that. I do find the pound shop and Home Bargains and places like that are amazing for snacks. High fats as well as like a good snack. Amelia tends to snack on kind of fruit. She's quite a grazer throughout the day, so she always has fruit available for her. And the little fruit flakes as well. She has those on her on her fruit on fruit. But apart from that, she doesn't really have much more apart from yogurts. I use a lot of the own brand fruits as well, from like the Just Essentials or the Aldi owns ones. So yeah, I use a lot of like own brand stuff.
Yeah, that would be my main suggestion around snacks. If you want snacks that are packaged that you can go on the go and you don't want to do any prep for your snack, that is the best way to go. Ditch the brands, go for own brand. That's probably the easiest in terms of on the go snacks. If you have got the time and the extra effort and the ability, prepping some snacks at home is going to be easier. For example, I'm thinking off the top of my head, cheese snacks. A lot of our patients have to snack on cheese, good for your calcium as well. Buying a block of, say, cheaper cheese that's the supermarket owned cheese, chopping that into tiny squares is much easier than buying, much cheaper, not easier, than buying, say, the branded ones, whether they're cheese strings, baby valves, little mini cheese bites you can get. But it all comes with prep. Same things come with yogurt. It's much easier to buy a big tub of yogurt for cheapness, but then that is you having to put that into smaller pots. If you want fruit with it, adding fruit then. So prep and making things yourself is going to be the cheapest way. It's just balancing that with time as well. I'll hand over to Claire. She might have some more good snack ideas.
Yeah, I mean, same sort of thing. I agree. You have to be willing to do a bit of prep work, maybe some slightly simpler prep work. And the way to make it sort of the things that are expensive go a bit further is, like you sort of talked about the fruit flakes and things, which are often, children like them, but they're a little bit more expensive. But then maybe if we spread those into 4 days or 5 days worth of snacks, add some cereal that's cheaper, into that as snack bites as well, raisins, which you can buy a bit more in bulk, not necessarily cheap, but they're cheaper when you then buy them in a big bag that you're going to spread around into pots. So you can, have like fruit, there's a fruit flakes in there, the nicer bits in there, maybe even some fresh fruit in there as well if you wanted to. Obviously, depending on the age of the child, you can put nuts in there as well. So again, buying things that are a bigger bulk that you can spread over a few things. And like you say, you can buy some cheaper things like, the breakfast cereals, buy an own brand, Cheerios type equivalent, that sort of thing. You can then spread that around days and days, and it's not costing you a lot of money. And actually, it's quite a nutritious snack compared to, just sort of crisps or something, because they actually add good stuff to breakfast cereals for us, which they don't add to, crisp biscuits or things. The other thing is, if you're a bit more adventurous, making your own. So making your own, biscuits and things like that, you can do that quite cheaply as well. So again, it depends on people's ability, but again, a little bit of prep, make your week's worth of biscuit, like kind of nutritious biscuit. If you use something like peanut butter based biscuits, they're really nutritious, good calories if you need the extra calories, but still and have protein in them compared to just kind of just standard sweet biscuits. So they're still sweet, but they've got some nutrition in. But yeah, spread them out for the week. And the trick is making sure they don't eat them all as soon as they come out the oven.
Something like homemade cereal bars as well, that you don't actually have to cook if you're not the baker. Similar to a flapjack, but you can add in like seeds, nuts, dried fruit. Again, it's prep, but if you've got kids at home, I'm sure they'd love to help you. stir it all up and stuff. So it's almost an activity as well. And interesting enough, on the cereals, we in our office were looking at cereals and the sugar content. People kept asking us when we were doing diabetes work, and actually own brands tended to have lower sugar content than the main brands. I can't say that from a fact, but all of them, actually the ones that we could compare, were slightly better. So the brands aren't always better nutrition as well. So I think that's always there to bear in mind.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Thank you so much. I know it's been like really heavy on you two tonight, but I hope people found it helpful. I think, is there any?
There's just one more question, isn't there? I don't know. It sits between both of us 16, so I don't know. I mean, it's just about kind of takeaway and things, isn't it? Katie might have some more ideas. She probably deals with it a little bit more than me. But I mean, you know, sometimes you can do a bit of both, getting them to opt for a smaller amount of something in a takeaway and then come home, you know, so there's things like that you can do. So they're still getting to do what they want with their friends maybe, but you can kind of reduce the cost of that, you know, encouraging them to maybe take a drink with them so they don't need to get that as well, you know, so that type of thing. And then maybe if that's the type of food they want to eat, you know, you can do those types of foods at home, and encouraging to eat those sorts of things at home as well is often, but it's a bit more tricky with a 16-year-old sometimes to get them a little bit on board with the options that we can do at home, because it's just never good enough, is it?
No, I think it's difficult when they want to fit in with their friends. Wow. I suppose it's teaching them to be a bit savvy, depending on how much they want to speak to you about it, and showing them maybe the cheaper options to go for, but that's not as obvious to their friends that they're not having the same as well. It is a hard one when all they want to do is fit in. Similarly with brands, I'm sure you have children coming home from school saying, but Mom, Betty's got this brand of it, I want that brand. And I think that must be really hard to handle.
Yeah, I bet. I think there's one question we received in advance was about gastronomy feeding.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
I think that question was on eating and things as well. I would probably say around gastrostomy feeding and any specific advice going back to your team, because that's hard to advise on without knowing clinical details. If you're eating and doing feed, so I'd say go and ask your CF dietitian on advice on that, because we can't do anything around the feed and the prescription of that.
Because it was specifically related to short gut, wasn't it? Yeah, and it's really difficult to answer that, because you do really need to know that specific person's kind of situation to be able to give advice, because it would be very different. So it's really difficult for us to answer that. But often, you know, a lot of the things we've talked about are still relevant. It's just then matching it to what would be their specific kind of need, which is a little bit tricky for us to answer because it's very broad.
oh, thank you so much. I think, is Jacqueline around?
Hiya. Thank you so much. That was incredibly interesting, and I hope that everyone who's been watching has found it useful. There's been so many fantastic insights there, I think, and as mentioned, we have recorded this, so we'll be putting it on our YouTube channel, and if you want to come back to it, share it with family and friends or anything like that, please do so. And I know my colleagues have been putting some links to the hub content in the chat as well, so there's lots of information you can read on there, and we will be adding to that over the coming weeks as well. I'd like to say a huge thank you to our panel, particularly Holly for chairing the questions so brilliantly and for sharing your own experiences so openly, but also to Claire and Katie, who've been helping us plan this event and have taken a lot of time out of their schedules to help us develop our information for the hub as well. It's been hugely appreciated. And Luke, I know, will be disappointed that he wasn't able to join us. So Luke is a chef with CF, and he's been providing us with lots of really useful information as well as we developed our hub. So hopefully we might have a bit more opportunity to work with Luke in the future. So thank you to my colleagues who've just posted up a slide about information and support. So I just wanted to let you know about some of the services that we can offer more generally around cost of living, but also around nutrition. So on our website, you can find details of all of our support services, such as our welfare grants, our benefits advice service, and also our income maximisation service. And if anyone who is on the call or who's watching later is struggling with the cost of food or other basic essentials, then we do encourage you to get in touch with our helpline because we might be able to help through providing a grant. And you can contact our helpline for anything to do with CF from Monday to Friday, 10 till 4, by email or by telephone. And also our cost of living hub, I think, is linked there as well. So there's lots of information and signposting on there. And we also publish more generally a suite of nutrition leaflets. I think we have around 22 leaflets that we've produced together with the UK Dietitians Group. So if you're not familiar with those, I know we've posted a couple of them in the chat, but please do have a look and share any feedback, or if there's any information gaps that you'd like us to produce more info on, please do let us know. So moving on to the events that we have coming up. So I mentioned earlier, this is one of a series of nutrition events. And we have, I think, 4 more planned. So if we could see the next slide, I think they're all listed. So the next one is on CF diabetes, and that will be on the 31st of January, so Tuesday the 31st. And then following on from that, we'll have exercise nutrition on the 28th of February. And we also have 2 more nutrition events planned. So one's on mindful eating and one's on gut health. So we're just confirming those dates, but they should be in March and April. So just one very quick last request from me is that we'll be sending out a short feedback questionnaire shortly after this event. And if you do have a few minutes to fill it in, that will really help us to plan and improve on our future events. But meanwhile, a huge thank you once again to the panel, and thank you all for coming and taking time out of your evening. I hope you've found it really useful. Thanks also to my colleagues at the Trust who've been helping this evening and helped organise the event. And we hope to see you at a future CF Live. So have a lovely evening.